This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
April 1986. A raging house fire set by an arsonist takes the life of a wealthy widow in Aurora, Missouri. 5 days later, Johnny Lee Wilson, a young retarded man, confesses to the crime and is sent to prison. 2 years later, another man claims to have been present at the murder and insists that Wilson is innocent. Today, the controversy has divided the town. Is Johnny Lee Wilson a killer or a victim? In Edmore, North Dakota, Kenneth Engie and Curtis Heck came to blows over a woman in a bar fight. The next day, Engie is found dead. The police call it an accident. Kenneth Engie's family thinks otherwise. We'll also introduce you to a most unusual artist, an Englishwoman who seems to have the ability to create lifelike portraits of people she has never seen. In fact, people who have been dead for years. Incredibly, many witnesses swear to the uncanny accuracy of her drawings. Join me for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.
Very suddenly, I don't know quite.
March 1990, 200 people in Clarksville, Indiana paid $15 apiece for a demonstration by Carl POLGE, a British artist with an unusual vision.
He doesn't actually tell me how he was killed.
For years, audiences from around the world have been mystified by Carl's work and often touched by the results.
No clear image in his mind of how it happened. And
her drawings are simple portraits, nothing fancy. But Carl's subjects are otherworldly, people who have been dead for years.
He had no real sense of responsibility. That's the big problem.
I don't actually see these people. I don't hear them. And I honestly don't quite know how I do it. I just sense them. Also, there is an element of what we call automatic control, as if somebody takes over my hand and gives me a certain amount of help in getting the drawings accurate. With good results, obviously, it's not always good, but when we do get good results, we get quite nice likenesses of people's relatives who have passed into the world of spirit.
Today, Carl POLGE lives in a small town in England. For the last 40 years, she is possessed and been possessed by her unusual ability. The concept of life after death has fascinated mankind for centuries. It is a fascination ripe for exploitation by mediums and clairvoyants who claim the power to communicate with the spirit world. Some are obvious charlatans, but others display gifts which seem to defy explanation. During the past 4 decades, Carl POLGE has drawn more than 100,000 eerie portraits. It could be argued that she is nothing more than a keen observer of faces, but her drawings of people she could never have known or seen are uncannily accurate and have convinced some skeptics that her powers could be real. In 1984, photographer Peter Cook went to Carl POLGE's home in Surrey, England. Peter was on assignment for a national newspaper.
I've always been a pretty open-minded kind of person, and I was a bit skeptical. I had heard about people speaking with the dead and through the dead, but when it came to drawing, it was a different matter. Do you have any drawings that you've done that I can
Yes,
take with you?
but I think it might be better if I...
Peter and Coral had never met before. He had no idea he was about to become Coral's subject.
Sit down and we'll see what we can get for you.
And Coral just simply asked me to sit down next to her, and I did. And she came up with some pretty astounding pictures.
Now I've got a little elderly lady here coming through. She brings me a...
The first of the pictures that she started to draw was my grandmother.
Rounded cheeks and...
As it took shape, I could see that it was going to be somebody that I recognised. And my stomach was beginning to churn just a little because it was my first experience of anybody talking about my grandmother or any other relation in that kind of manner.
A beautiful rosy complexion. In fact, she might even be called Rosie. I keep getting the word Rosie. But she's smiling, very much what I'd call a country complexion. And what she's showing me now definitely confirms that it's a little water butt where she probably had to get her drinking water from.
According to Peter, his grandmother's name was Minnie Rose. She did have rosy cheeks, and her drinking water came from a rain barrel.
It wasn't so much the picture that she drew that I recognized, so much as the description she was giving, and the names and the people that were near her. And they were pretty astonishing.
Now, are we making any sense to you, Peter?
Anybody who's a skeptic should really, I mean, they better open their eyes, because I believe it.
Minnie Rose died in 1962. Peter Cook is positive that Coral had no way of knowing what she looked like. In the same sitting, Coral also drew Peter Cook's mother, Emily, who died in 1978.
Coral certainly has a special gift. I don't understand why, and I have to say that Coral really has sparked me off to investigating in some depth as to the possibility of life after death.
Coral became aware of her gift just after World War II. Her mother suffered from severe arthritis. When nothing else could ease her mother's pain, Coral took her to a spiritualist.
I must admit I nearly died of fright on the spot because the medium came to me and said, "Do you know you're a psychic artist?" Which I didn't. I didn't even know what she meant. And she said, "Well, you are an artist," which was true. And she told me one day I'd be a very famous medium. And I must admit, I thought she was completely balmy. And so I began to sit to try and develop the gift, and eventually, within 2 or 3 years, was getting psychic drawings. I gave up counting how many we'd ever done when I got to 100,000. It just goes on. And I don't have time to keep records. A lady always held her head up so straight.
You're drawing my aunt.
Not Aunt Ethel, we were just...
Lorraine Ferraro was another witness to Coral's powers. Coral drew this portrait of Lorraine's aunt who died when Lorraine was 6.
I have photos that... They're exactly the same. It's quite remarkable. I have never met Coral in my life. It's the first time I've heard of her, never mind meet her, and I'm devastated, shattered. I just couldn't believe what I saw.
When people come to me for sittings, some come out of curiosity, some come because they're desperate for evidence, and I hope that I can prove to them that there is a life after death. It doesn't always work, but we try.
Is Coral POLGE truly gifted? Or is she merely a talented artist with extraordinary powers of perception? For those who believe, Coral POLGE's drawings provide comfort and reassurance that there may be life after death.
Well, I don't find it mysterious at all. I've come to a stage where, to me, it's so normal, so ordinary, and I find that life becomes more beautiful. One would not hasten going into the world of spirit, but it's a beautiful thought that one day we're all going to be reunited with those people we've loved and temporarily been parted from.
In a moment, an investigation of the fiery murder of a wealthy 79-year-old widow. Two different men have confessed to the same crime. Every week, hundreds of calls are received here in our telecenter, many with suggestions for stories. Several months ago, one of our producers received a startling telephone call from a man in prison. From his cell, he told us that before his imprisonment, he'd been involved in a murder for which another man had been convicted. His call led us into the disquieting case of Johnny Lee Wilson, a mildly retarded young man serving a life sentence for the murder of an elderly woman. What makes this case so intriguing is that Wilson had confessed to the crime, a confession his proponents say was coerced. And now, the final appeal of Johnny Lee Wilson. Aurora, Missouri, population 7,000. A typical middle American small town where everyone knows everyone else. And everyone in Aurora knew Johnny Wilson, a mildly retarded 20-year-old with an IQ of 71, who, according to psychologists, had the emotional development of a fourth grader. Johnny was raised in Aurora by his mother and grandmother.
I'm going down to Ramey's for some pop.
Okay, be careful, hon.
Johnny was a quiet boy. He was a homeboy. He never did cause us any trouble, but he had problems, learning disability, and we had to have special education for him. And a lot of the kids we thought in school didn't treat him, so good. But really, Johnny has always been a happy boy. Even when we knew things maybe were kind of bad sometimes, he was happy.
Hi, Mrs. March.
On school days, Johnny left his bicycle with Mrs. Pauline Martz because his classmates would often vandalize
All
it.
right if I leave my bike here?
Why, you know it is.
Mrs. Martz was a close friend of Johnny's
After
grandmother.
school.
See you then.
At 79, she was the last surviving member of the wealthiest family in Aurora and owned the town's largest business. April 13th, 1986. At 8 p.m. in the evening, fire and rescue squads rushed to the home of Pauline Martz. By the time they arrived, the house was engulfed in flames. When firemen were finally able to search the wreckage, they found the charred body of Pauline Martz. The official cause of death was smoke inhalation, but the fire was not an accident. Mrs. Martz had been bound and gagged with rope and duct tape. Investigators concluded the fire was deliberately set, started with gasoline. There was an immediate public outcry. Pauline Martz had been one of Aurora's most beloved citizens. 5 days later, anger turned to shock. The police picked up Johnny Wilson for questioning, interrogated him for nearly 4 hours, and finally arrested him after he had confessed to the crime. A confession he would later recant.
I just made the mistake by confessing to it when I didn't do it. To this day, I don't know why that I said I did it, It just happened. I didn't want it to happen, but it did, and it was just a mistake on my part, saying that I did it when I really didn't. It was a mistake on my part.
For the past 4 years, the Johnny Wilson case has divided the small town of Aurora. Many believe Johnny is innocent. Law enforcement officials disagree. When we requested interviews with the Lawrence County Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office, they insisted they had put the right man behind bars and declined to participate in the broadcast. The recreations of court proceedings and Johnny Wilson's interrogation and confession have been filmed word for word from official transcripts. Sunday, April 13th, 1986. On the day of the fire, Johnny spent the early afternoon at home taping records with a friend. Later, he mowed a neighbor's lawn. When Johnny was finished, his mother drove him home. She and his grandmother claim he could not possibly have been at Pauline Martz's house when the fire was set.
They didn't get home until about 5 o'clock. And as soon as they got home, the neighbor boy came back over again to tape. And he stayed until nearly 7.
And then when they left at 7, Johnny and I put up 9 posters in his bedroom. And then when that was done, then we, about 25 to 8, we left and went and mailed 2 letters, and went up to Ramey's, got some things, and then when we came out, that's when we heard the sirens.
We heard the sirens, so we went over by and saw that this Pauline's house, the back of the house was engulfed in flames.
Hey, Johnny, how's it going? Not bad, how about you?
18-year-old Gary Wall was also mildly retarded.
Friend of my grandma.
He and Johnny were both enrolled in a special education program at the local high school.
See you later. Bye.
Basically, I just said, hi, how are you, and, bye, and then I went back to the car and sat in the back seat, and that was it.
Hey, Johnny. Hey.
The next morning, Gary Wall was questioned by police.
No.
He gave them a completely different version of his conversation with Johnny.
Mrs. Martz is in there. Well, how do you know? She's tied up. Well, you sound like you know something about this. You tell anybody and I'm gonna beat you up. Okay, Johnny.
Gary Wall later took a total of 6 lie detector tests. He failed all but one. The morning after Johnny's arrest, sheriff's deputies went to the Wilson home to search for evidence.
They came to search the house and said they had a warrant. And I gave them permission to search because I didn't think they'd find anything, see. But they did. I mean, they thought they did. They went to his room and just started taking things out of drawers and cabinets and things that was in there.
The authorities believe that Johnny had sexually assaulted Mrs. Martz. Deputies found women's underwear in a bureau in Johnny's room. However, the family said the bureau and clothing belonged to Johnny's mother. In Johnny's confession, he admitted to stealing jewelry. The deputies also took costume jewelry, which Johnny's grandmother said she used for sewing. Finally, they found a nearly empty gas can, which investigators would later say was used to start the fire. Johnny Wilson was charged with first-degree murder. Because of his diminished mental faculties, Johnny was examined to determine if he was fit to stand trial.
What'd you like about high school?
I was a manager for the football team. They gave me a jacket and everything.
All right. Did you have any friends in school?
When you're asked to evaluate someone's fitness to stand trial, you look at first whether they understand what the charges are against them, and then second, are they able to reason and make their own decisions about whether to enter a plea? Are they able to decide whether they want to testify in their own behalf at a trial? Are they able to help their attorney by giving him a consistent account of what happened?
How about a job? Did you ever have a job?
And in those particular range of skills, I did not think Johnny was competent to stand trial.
I used to work at the hardware store.
Johnny, when the police arrested you, did they ask you anything about Miranda rights?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you know what Miranda rights are?
Yeah.
What are they?
Well, it's the difference between right and wrong.
Johnny was ultimately examined by 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist. 2 of the 3 judged that he was incapable of understanding the court proceedings. However, the 3rd, a court-appointed psychiatrist, determined that he was fit to stand trial. Johnny told his court-appointed attorneys he was innocent. However, based upon his confession, the testimony of Gary Wall, and other evidence, his attorneys advised him to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. By pleading guilty, Johnny lost his right to a trial by jury.
Because he had given a confession, his attorneys told him that it would be very likely that he would get convicted if this went to trial. And they also told him that this judge was very likely to give him the death penalty based on prior cases that had gone before this judge. And so what he understood was if he went to trial and he was found guilty, that he would die.
What is your understanding of why you're here this afternoon?
Plead guilty.
Why are you pleading guilty, Johnny?
I don't know.
Pardon?
This recreation of Johnny's hearing is taken verbatim from court transcripts.
Just a first-degree murder.
But that's what you're pleading guilty to. Why are you wanting to enter such a plea?
I don't know.
The so-called plea of guilty should have been stopped about 60 seconds after it started. The judge asked Johnny if he knew what he was doing, and Johnny Wilson said no. I don't understand why I'm here. I don't understand what's going on. And the judge said, do you want to plead guilty to this charge? And Johnny said, no, I don't want to plead guilty to it. At that point, the circuit judge should have said, gentlemen, court's adjourned. This case will be set for trial in 2 weeks. I expect everyone to be here and be ready for trial. I'm not going to take this plea of guilty. But he didn't. The judge went further, continued to cross-examine Johnny, and finally accepted the plea of guilty.
Was voluntarily entered and will accept your plea and pronounce sentence. Upon your plea of guilty in this cause, the court sentences you to life imprisonment in the custody of the Missouri Department of Corrections. Court stands adjourned.
Johnny Wilson was immediately remanded to the Missouri State Penitentiary. 10 months later, at a prison in Kansas, this man confessed that he knew who killed Pauline Martz. And it wasn't Johnny Wilson. When we return, we will examine evidence which has led many to believe that Johnny Lee Wilson is innocent. In 1986, Johnny Lee Wilson, a mildly retarded 20-year-old, confessed to the murder of Pauline Martz and was sentenced to life imprisonment. 2 years later, on February 11, 1988, convicted felon Chris Brownfield confessed to participating in the same crime. Brownfield was and still is serving a life sentence in Kansas for accessory to murder.
Once I found out that they had a retarded boy that they'd forced into confessing to the crime and stuff, I just kind of got feeling sorry for him, and then I found out he was raised by his grandmother and mother, you know, and I was raised by my grandmother, so I had a lot of feelings toward probably what they felt. And it was just such a situation. To me, it was so cut and dried that they had the wrong man. I just thought shouldn't be any problem, you know, to tell them they got the wrong man, look at it, and release the boy.
According to Chris Brownfield, he and an unnamed accomplice had been tipped off that Pauline Martz kept a great deal of money in her home. They broke into the house.
Hey, it's all right, man. Just relax, all right? We're not gonna hurt you. Come on, just watch her. Oh. Where's your money at, lady, huh?
According to Brownfield, they ransacked the house. Mrs. Martz was bound and gagged. Brownfield and his accomplice decided to burn down the house so that no evidence would be left at the scene. Brownfield says he was outside when his accomplice started the fire.
Where's the lady? She's still in the house. I thought we were gonna get out of here. She got a pretty good look at me. Let's get out of here. Let's go on back, see if we can get her out.
Brownfield claims he later tried to go back inside to save Mrs. Martz. It was too late. The two men fled the scene. When the news of Chris Brownfield's confession was made public, the town of Aurora was thrown into turmoil. One group of citizens banded together and erected this billboard. Shortly thereafter, it was firebombed by an unknown party. The sheriff believed Chris Brownfield's confession was part of an elaborate escape plan and discounted it.
Chris Brownfield is a cold-blooded murderer. He has killed senior citizens before using the exact MO in the same manner that Mrs. Martz was killed.
Noted Missouri attorney DEE WOMPLER was hired to represent Johnny and reopen the case. WOMPLER became convinced that Johnny's confession had been coerced.
It's the first time the state of Missouri has ever put a third grader on trial for murder.
Okay, thank you very much.
Johnny Lee Wilson was at a movie theater on the night that he supposedly confessed, and they tricked him into going with them to the police headquarters. He had lost a billfold several days earlier, and they came and asked him to go to the police station, and he thought that he was going because they had found his billfold.
Johnny, did you lose a wallet?
Yeah.
Well, we found it. We got it down at the police station. If you come down and identify it, you can pick it up, take it on home.
Okay.
Come on, here.
His mother and grandmother were not told that they were going to question him that evening.
John, is there any possibility that you are involved in this?
No.
What if I told you I thought you was?
The police interrogation began at 8:30 p.m. and was concluded just after midnight.
What if I told you you was seen at that fire before it started?
Oh, I'd say I wasn't.
The words spoken in these scenes are taken verbatim from transcripts of a police tape recording.
What would you do if we brought in a witness in here, in this chair, and he sat here and looked you right in the eye and said, John, you was there before that fire started.
They kept on saying, well, we know you did it. We know we got a witness saying that you told him you did it, and after that, you know, I maintained my innocence. I said I didn't do it. I don't know who did. I didn't do it.
Murder's what you're in here for.
They started yelling, saying, well, we know you did it. You're going to tell us that you did it. So we can just get this all wrapped up so we can all go home.
We didn't know she was tied up. How'd that information get out? There's a whole bunch of people out there that night that came up with information that she was tied up.
The language used was so aggressive. What an ordinary individual might have done at that point was to end the interview or ask for their attorney. But being a fairly young man who was limited intellectually and no prior experience with the criminal justice system and the emotional stability of an 8 or 9-year-old, they're not going to know to say, get out of my face, stop talking to me, you know, I didn't do it, and you know, I've already told you that, I want to end this. He didn't think he had the permission to end this. He didn't know he could end the interrogation.
I wasn't within 5 miles of that house.
You know too much. Why'd Gary make up something like that on you? He mad at you?
At the end of the interrogation, he forced my head back, and that's when I said, okay, I did it. But when I really didn't, that's when I lied.
What besides a rope was around her ankles?
The interrogation continued. The deputies pressed for details.
You know, and I know. Just think. Come on, John.
I'm thinking.
Well, what are some of the things that could be used?
Handcuffs, I think.
No, wrong guess.
If you're a scared kid, you know, sometimes you lie to get out of trouble. And essentially, when he gave this confession, I think he may have been lying to get out of trouble. The immediate trouble of the moment, which was a couple of angry detectives, you know, questioning him pretty vigorously.
They just simply said, if you'll tell us what we want to know, we can all go home. And he was just acting like a child that has brain damage, and he thought, okay, I'll tell them what they want to know, and then we'll all go home.
But Johnny did not go home.
At the end of the confession, they slapped the handcuffs on me and walked me out the door and drove me to Mount Vernon and locked me up. That's when I thought, says, no, I ain't going home over something that I think just ruined my life. I'd sit in my jail cell, you know, just thinking, you know, I didn't do this, you know, and that's the bottom line, you know, I just want to go home.
Former Sheriff's Deputy Dustin Toller began studying the evidence on his own. He came to Johnny's defense.
As I got into the reports, I observed that what was being said about Johnny Wilson by the Sheriff's Department and other investigative agencies and what was substantiated by evidence were not the same thing.
Toller discovered that the costume jewelry taken by investigators from the Wilson home belonged to Johnny's grandmother. The underwear they found belonged to Johnny's mother. And there was another gas can found at the crime scene which was never entered into evidence.
The more I observed, the less evidence I could find. I never did find anything that could tie Johnny Wilson to the case.
One surprising piece of evidence which was discovered at the crime scene was a battery-operated stun gun.
No, I haven't. That's a stun gun. Stun gun? Yeah, go ahead and push the trigger.
In his confession, Chris Brownfield mentioned losing a stun gun during the robbery. The weapon which he described was identical to the one found at the scene.
It had never been publicized that a stun gun had been used in this crime. Chris Brownfield, in his confession, was the first one who ever mentioned the stun gun. He described the stun gun and drew a picture of it that was identical to the stun gun that was eventually found at the crime scene. Johnny Lee Wilson didn't even know what a stun gun was. He was asked about it. He thought a stun gun was an electric razor.
On May 8, 1989, DEE WOMPLER presented a motion in circuit court requesting that Johnny Wilson be given a jury trial. The motion was denied. The judge ruled that Johnny was competent when he pled guilty and that Chris Brownfield was not a credible witness. Brownfield had refused to testify in person at the hearing.
How would the state of Missouri suffer from giving this poor little boy a trial? It probably would only take 2 or 3 days. I couldn't see that there's any harm or damage in it, and he should have been given a trial, in my opinion.
Today, Johnny Wilson is still serving his life sentence. He has been placed in protective custody because prison officials believe he would not be able to protect himself in the general prison population. Johnny will be eligible for parole when he is 70 years old.
Justice has been very difficult to find in the Johnny Wilson case. It's one of those cases, perhaps there's only 1 in 1,000, where an innocent man is doing time in the penitentiary. And Johnny Lee Wilson is innocent, and if he had a trial, he would probably be acquitted. I don't think the jury would deliberate more than an hour before they acquitted him. And it's a shame that he never got a chance to prove his innocence.
All I want is somebody to believe in me, you know, just that I didn't do this.
In September of 1990, an appeal was heard before the Missouri Appellate Court. Johnny's appeal for a trial was denied once again. When we return, a man is found dead in his garage the morning after a barroom brawl. An accident or foul play? October 4th, 1988, 3:30 p.m.
Hey, what did you find when you first came to the door?
Police in Edmore, North Dakota began an investigation into the death of a local auto repairman. An hour earlier, the body of 27-year-old Kenneth Engie had been discovered in his own garage by his uncle. The cause of death, massive carbon monoxide poisoning. Initial indications pointed to a probable suicide.
Kenny had too much going for him to be committing suicide. You know, that was way too far. You know, he didn't have any troubles that would bother him that much.
Almost immediately, bits of evidence began to cast doubt on the suicide theory. A fully loaded .22 caliber rifle was lying 6 feet from Engie. There was a small pool of blood on the floor, but no marks on the body and no sign of a struggle. Even more puzzling, the fuel tank of the truck in the garage was nearly full and the ignition had been turned off. If Kenneth Engie had in fact committed suicide by inhaling carbon monoxide, then who turned off the truck's engine? The investigation into Kenneth Engie's death was stymied. His family vehemently insisted that suicide was out of the question. But if there was foul play involved, who could have had a motive and the opportunity to commit the crime? Within 12 hours, the police found a potential suspect who had both motive and opportunity. 2 a.m., Kunkel's Bar on the main street of Edmore. By closing time, only 2 customers remained. Kenneth Engie and Curtis Heck, another auto repairman.
Kenny, look, I'm closing up. You gotta go.
I'm taking you home tonight.
I got it right.
Who are you going with?
Curtis.
You really are a tramp, aren't you?
Ow.
I want to talk to you. She's going home with me. Get your hands off me!
Neither one of us are Muhammad Ali. I mean, it was rolling around on the floor wrestling and a bunch of dumb stuff. There was some punches thrown back and forth, but nobody really got hurt. And at one point, I got him down on the floor, and I held him down there, and I told him, I'm going to let you up. And I said, when I let you up, I want you to just walk out the door. And I let him up, and then he did go out the door.
Moments later, Kenneth Engie retaliated.
I heard the crash out front, and I knew what it was as soon as I heard it. And I seen my pickup out there. It had been broadsided. I thought about just forgetting the whole thing, but the more I thought about it, I thought me and Kenny were both body men, and he had just annihilated my pickup. So I thought, if I'm gonna have to fix my vehicle, then he's gonna have to fix his.
Approximately 1 hour later, Heck and the barmaid arrived at Engie's home. Engie's truck was parked in the driveway.
I heard a noise coming from the garage. It's a groaning sound. So I went around to the back door, and I opened up the door, and I went in.
You know you totaled my truck, don't you?
I should have realized, that there was something wrong with him, but I didn't. I was mad at him anyway. Any other time, if I'd have seen somebody on the floor moaning and groaning, I certainly wouldn't have left him there. But, the guy just smashed my pickup all to pieces, and I figured he was sick from drinking, so I figured go ahead and spend the night on the garage floor.
According to the official police report, this is the last time Kenneth Engie was seen alive.
I believe that Kenneth Engie, when he was in the garage and it became cool, started the vehicle, sat there and waited for Curtis Heck to come to the garage for the confrontation that was bound to happen. Realizing that something is happening to him, at this point I believe he turned the vehicle off that was in the garage, a pickup, started to head for the door, and didn't quite make it to the door before he collapsed. Time passed, and he died waiting for Curtis Heck.
Engi's uncle, Richard NYGAARD, disagrees with the police.
I think Kenny was a little bit smarter than that to start a vehicle up and leave it running in the garage while he was still in there. He might have started it up just so he could move it and probably run his own vehicle in and run that one out.
NYGAARD believes that Engi heard Heck kicking his truck. He feels that the two men had another confrontation inside the garage.
He fell down and probably, was knocked unconscious, and Kurt just shut the door and walked away, and then realized the truck was running and come back and went in and shut it off. With a sealed garage, there was still enough carbon monoxide fumes in there to still do somebody in.
The autopsy does not indicate that there was any assault on that body, and I don't believe there was.
It doesn't make me very happy to know that I was the last person to see him alive and walked out the door and left him there. But I had absolutely no reason to think that there was any carbon monoxide involved, because there was a vehicle in his garage. There was a friend of his pickup in the garage. But it wasn't running, and I don't remember seeing any smoke in the garage. I don't remember. I think I would have noticed that.
Several puzzling questions continue to loom over this case. Did Kenneth Engi start up the truck to keep warm until the inevitable arrival of Curtis Heck? Engi was a trained mechanic and certainly knew the lethal possibilities of running an engine in a small enclosed space, unless alcohol had completely impaired his judgment. But if a drunken Engi did start the truck and was overcome by fumes, how could he have had the clarity of mind to cut the ignition but be unable to reach the door just 15 feet away? And finally, if it was not Engi who turned off the ignition, then who did and left him on the floor to die?
We believe that the death occurred from a lethal dose of carbon monoxide and that there was no criminal foul play involved. The family wants to continue the investigation as to theories, which they're certainly entitled to, but law enforcement has officially closed this case.
There just doesn't seem to be a clear-cut answer to it. And there's been a lot of stories and rumors, and it's been hell on everybody is what it's been. And I'd like to see an answer to it someplace.
I don't think they'll ever have a final that says this is exactly what happened. I don't think they ever will. There's too many loose ends.
On our next Unsolved Mysteries, few people in Warwickshire, England mourn the demise of Dorothea Allen, an eccentric recluse and corset manufacturer who mysteriously destroyed all traces of her past. Dorothea left no will, and her $4 million estate will simply pass on to the government unless her heirs can be found. Join me next week for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.